You think you can touch me and walk away? The words tore through the classroom like a knife. Desks screeched backward. A chair toppled. Every student froze. Bryce Kensington, lacrosse captain, straight C student, and son of the town's wealthiest developer, stood in the center of the lab, his hand clenched around the throat of the new chemistry teacher, Ms. Amina Reyes. It was supposed to be a routine Tuesday. Pop quiz, Bunsen burners, whispers of who liked who. But then Bryce had made a crude joke about Ms. Reyes's accent, and when she told him to leave the classroom, he laughed in her face. When she calmly repeated herself, he stepped closer, too close. And when she put her hand on the classroom phone to call the office, he snapped. Now his knuckles were white against the brown skin of her neck. The whole class watched, not sure whether to intervene or flee. One girl began to record. A boy near the door fumbled with the handle, unsure whether to run for help. But Ms. Reyes didn't flinch. Not once. Instead, she looked Bryce dead in the eyes and smiled. A quiet, deliberate smile. Then she moved. And what happened next was something no one in room 206 would ever forget. Bryce barely noticed her shifting weight. He thought he had her. That this moment, this public domination, would make her shrink, apologize, obey. But her smile wasn't fear. It was a warning. In one fluid motion, Ms. Reyes dropped her chin and spun on the ball of her foot. Her left arm snapped up between them, breaking the chokehold with the force of a lever. Bryce stumbled, his balance gone. Before he could curse, her right hand was already guiding his wrist behind his back. Quick, firm, surgical. Bryce cried out, but she was already moving. A twist of the elbow, a sweep of the ankle. His knees hit the floor with a hollow thunk. She didn't throw a punch. She didn't have to. Every movement was precise, efficient, trained. Within seconds, Bryce was on his stomach, one arm pinned in a joint lock, the other trapped under his own weight. The entire class stared in stunned silence. No one moved. No one spoke. The room was a frozen tableau of teenage disbelief. Ms. Reyes released Bryce's arm slowly, standing up without a breath out of place. She didn't even glance at the camera phones now raised like modern torches. She turned to the class, her tone calm, steady. "Can someone call the principal, please? And tell them we have a situation that needs resolving, with witnesses." Nobody disobeyed. Not anymore. Bryce groaned on the floor, red-faced and furious, but too stunned to rise. A student near the door finally unlatched it and bolted into the hallway, yelling for help. Two others had already texted their parents. One kid whispered, "Bro, she moved like Jason Bourne," to no one in particular. In the silence that followed, eyes darted toward Ms. Reyes. Her blouse was rumpled, one sleeve slightly torn, but her posture was iron straight. She hadn't broken a sweat. "Everyone remained seated," she said evenly, surveying her class like she'd just handed out a worksheet, not dismantled a teenage boy twice her size. That was when Taylor, always the class clown, leaned forward and asked the question trembling at the edge of everyone's lips. "Wait, who is she?" Nobody answered. Because until today, Ms. Reyes had just been the mysterious new hire, quiet, strict, accent soft around the edges of her consonants. Some said she was from Queens. Others guessed Puerto Rico. But nobody knew. No one had asked. And now, nobody wanted to guess wrong. Bryce sat up slowly, rubbing his shoulder and snarling like he still had something to prove. Big mistake. Bryce staggered to his feet, jaw clenched, pride burning hotter than the pain in his shoulder. "You're gonna pay for that," he spat. "My dad owns half this school. You think anyone's gonna believe you over me?" He stepped forward again, but slower this time. Ms. Reyes didn't move, didn't flinch. Her eyes locked onto his, unreadable. Not angry, not smug, just still. "If you put your hands on me again, Bryce," she said softly, "I will break your wrist. And I'll do it in a way that even your father's lawyers won't be able to explain away." Her voice never rose above a calm register. But somehow, that only made it more terrifying. Bryce froze, not because he believed her, because he knew she meant it. A voice rang out from the hallway. "Mr. Jacobs, The vice principal, out of breath and red-faced, pushed through the door with 2 security officers behind him. What is going on in here? 20 hands pointed at once. Phone still recording. A dozen mouths started talking. But Bryce? He stayed quiet. For the first time in his life, he didn't have a comeback. Mr. Jacobs blinked at the chaotic scene. Bryce standing stiffly near the center of the room. Chairs askew, students wide-eyed, phones in the air. Ms. Reyes, composed and silent, stood calmly at her desk. What happened? Jacobs demanded, eyes narrowing at the tension in the room. Before Ms. Reyes could speak, Casey, usually shy, always in the second row, stood up. He grabbed her by the throat, in front of all of us. Several students nodded, murmuring affirmations. Jacobs turned to Bryce. Is that true? She attacked me. Bryce barked. She's crazy. Sir, Ms. Reyes interrupted gently. Several students recorded what happened. I recommend reviewing the footage before you assume anything. Jacobs glanced around at the raised phones, now all pointed at him. For a second, his face twitched with panic. Then a security officer stepped forward, his voice low. We should take statements. And we'll need the video evidence. This looks serious. Bryce scoffed. You're all dead. My dad's going to bury this school. But this time, no one laughed. Not even his usual crowd. Because the footage didn't lie. And neither did the quiet authority in Ms. Reyes's voice. By fourth period, the video had already made its way into the faculty group chat. At lunch, it was trending on local social media. By the end of the day, Bryce's father was on the phone with the superintendent, shouting, threatening, demanding explanations. But what he didn't expect was the one he got. Because while Bryce sat in the principal's office, arms crossed and jaw tight, Principal Ellison was scrolling silently through a digital personnel file on her screen. She looked up, voice cool. Mr. Kensington, I assume you're aware that Ms. Reyes served 8 years in the military? Bryce blinked. What? Marine Corps. Honorable discharge. Specialized in logistics and close-quarters combat instruction. Taught tactical response to security forces overseas. Holds black belts in 2 disciplines. Speaks 4 languages. She clicked to the next tab. She was recruited to this school under a Department of Education veteran placement program. Highly recommended. No disciplinary history. Bryce's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Principal Ellison leaned back. You're used to people folding when you raise your voice. Or your hand. Ms. Reyes didn't. And now we're all asking a different question, Bryce. She let it hang. Who raised you? The Kensingtons arrived in silence, but the silence didn't last. Bryce's father, Franklin Kensington, swept into the principal's office like he owned the building. Because in many ways, he did. His name was on half the donor plaques in the front lobby. My son was assaulted, he said, voice thunderous, by an employee of this school. I want her terminated immediately, and I expect a full apology in writing, today. Principal Ellison didn't flinch. She turned her monitor toward him, where a paused frame from the classroom video showed Bryce's hand wrapped around Ms. Reyes's throat. Franklin squinted, lips parting. I assume, Ellison said, her tone calm but firm. You'll want to watch the rest. She hit play. The entire altercation, Bryce's aggression, Ms. Reyes's restraint, the clinical precision with which she dismantled him, played out in crystal clear, high definition. When it ended, Ellison didn't speak. She just let the silence stretch. Franklin's face paled, then flushed. He looked over at his son. Tell me you didn't. Bryce tried to shrug, but no words came. Franklin turned back to the principal, his voice quieter now. Where is Ms. Reyes? In her classroom. Ellison said, teaching. Franklin exhaled, long and heavy. Then he said something no one expected. Schedule a meeting with her. When Franklin Kensington stepped into room 206 that afternoon, he looked like a different man than the one who had stormed into the principal's office. His steps were slower, shoulders not as squared. Ms. Reyes stood behind her desk, calmly sorting through lab reports. She didn't look up. I assume you're Mr. Kensington, she said evenly. He nodded. Yes, I I came to apologize for my son's behavior. She finally looked at him. Her expression was unreadable. Franklin cleared his throat, struggling to find footing. Bryce has always been strong-willed. But this crossed a line. Ms. Reyes tilted her head. He didn't just cross a line. He assumed there were none. Not for him. Franklin flinched. I didn't come to argue, he said quietly. I came to say thank you. For not hurting him worse. For showing restraint. Ms. Reyes raised an eyebrow. You misunderstand, Mr. Kensington. I didn't show restraint. I showed discipline. There's a difference. He nodded slowly. Then, after a long pause, may I ask, why teaching? After everything you've seen done? She looked at him, her gaze steady. Because the battlefield teaches one kind of lesson, she said. But a classroom, this is where the real wars are fought. Over ignorance, arrogance, entitlement. Franklin swallowed, the words landing heavier than he expected. Then he extended his hand. I hope you'll stay. Ms. Reyes didn't shake it, but she nodded once. Time will tell. Word traveled fast, faster than any official memo could have managed. By the next morning, room 206 wasn't just a classroom. It was the classroom. Students whispered in hushed reverence as they passed Ms. Reyes in the halls. No one laughed behind her back anymore. No more whispers about her accent. No more smirks when she handed out extra assignments. Even Bryce's usual crew, Braden, Lex, the twins from varsity track, had stopped cracking jokes. Because they'd all seen it. Not just the takedown, but the calm in her face, the control in her hands, the truth behind her silence. And most of all, the message. That power didn't always look like yelling. Sometimes it looked like walking away when you could destroy someone, and choosing not to. In third period, Ms. Reyes stood at the whiteboard, writing out the molecular breakdown of ethanol combustion. She didn't reference the incident, didn't change her tone. She taught like nothing had happened. But then, halfway through the lecture, she paused, turned, and said quietly, respect isn't earned through fear. It's earned through consistency, through how you treat people who can't do anything for you. Every student sat up straighter, Bryce included. That afternoon, Bryce found himself in detention, a place he hadn't visited in years. Usually, one phone call from his father had been enough to make those slips disappear. Not this time. Principal Ellison made it clear, zero tolerance. That applies to everyone. Bryce sat in silence, staring at the scuffed tabletop, the weight of his humiliation settling deeper than the bruises on his shoulder. For the first time, there were no texts from his friends. No comfort, just silence. The door creaked open. Ms. Reyes stepped in, clipboard in hand. Bryce looked up, startled. I'm supervising today, she said, walking past him. She didn't sit, didn't even look at him. Instead, she placed a single sheet of paper on his desk. It was blank, except for one question at the top. What do you believe gives someone value? Bryce blinked at it. What is this supposed to be, he muttered. A beginning, she said quietly. Then she turned away and resumed her post at the front of the room, eyes fixed out the window. He stared at the question for a long time. And for the first time in his life, he didn't know what to write. Bryce didn't finish the paper that day, but he didn't toss it either. He folded it, carefully, like something that mattered. Over the next week, things began to shift, not loudly, not dramatically, but subtly. He stopped cutting off classmates during group work, stopped mocking the freshmen with the stutter, even stopped parking in the teacher's lot just because he could. It didn't go unnoticed. In room 206, Ms. Reyes continued teaching with her usual poise, her hands always deliberate, her voice steady. She never mentioned the incident again, but her presence carried a new kind of gravity now, one built not from fear, but from respect. Other students began to follow suit, not out of obligation, but out of something else, reflection. One afternoon, after class, Bryce lingered. Everyone else had gone. He stood by the doorway, that same folded sheet in his hand, creased, a little smudged, but filled, now, with handwriting. I didn't know what gave someone value, he said softly, not looking at her. But I think I'm starting to get it. Ms. Reyes didn't move. She let the moment breathe. Then she said, "Understanding is earned the same way respect is, by showing up when it's uncomfortable." He nodded, and for once, didn't have a single sarcastic thing to say. By mid-semester, the gossip had faded. Not because people forgot, but because something better replaced it: growth. Ms. Reyes wasn't just the teacher who flipped Bryce Kensington. She became something else entirely. She was the one who stayed late to help with experiments. The one who remembered which students couldn't afford lab materials and found quiet ways to make sure they had what they needed. The one who gave second chances, not easily, but when they were earned. And Bryce? His reputation changed too. Not overnight. Not completely. But enough that when the student council planned a fundraiser for science equipment, he volunteered first. Enough that when someone called Ms. Reyes crazy under their breath in the cafeteria, Bryce stood up and said, "Don't." And they didn't. One afternoon, during a fire drill, Ms. Reyes stood at the edge of the soccer field, clipboard in hand, watching her class gather in rows. Bryce stood across the field with his team, but their eyes met. He gave a short nod. She returned it. No words. No need. Some transformations didn't need announcements. They were simply witnessed. A few weeks later, the school held a mandatory assembly on respect and accountability. The principal opened with routine reminders, a slideshow, a few awkward jokes. But then, unexpectedly, she invited someone to the podium. Ms. Amina Reyes is asked to say a few words. The auditorium shifted. Heads turned. Phones slid discreetly from pockets. Ms. Reyes stepped up to the microphone. No notes, no slides, just her. "You all know what happened," she began. "You saw the video. You saw the aftermath." She paused. "But what you didn't see was the before." Before that day, a student believed his status protected him, that his name, his family, or his bravado gave him license to disrespect someone. She looked out at the sea of faces. "What he didn't know," she said, her voice unwavering, "was that I didn't care about any of that." A ripple of laughter. Nervous, but real. "What I do care about," she continued, "is who you are when no one is filming. Who you are when no one is watching. That's what determines the kind of community we become." Then she paused, scanning the crowd, before finishing. "Power doesn't come from privilege. It comes from how you treat people who owe you nothing." Silence. Then applause. A real one this time. Not because they were told to, but because they believed her. That night, after the assembly, Bryce sat on the edge of his bed, staring at his phone. He'd watched the footage again, this time not to analyze, but to understand. Then he did something he rarely did. He called his father. Not to complain, not to defend himself, to confess. "Dad," he said, "I messed up, and I think I needed to." There was a long silence on the other end. Then Franklin Kensington exhaled. "I saw your face during her speech," he said. "You looked like me the day my father told me I wasn't special, just lucky." Bryce swallowed. "She didn't humiliate me. I did that to myself." Franklin's voice softened. "You're not the first Kensington to learn that the hard way." Another pause. "Bryce," he said, "you apologized to her, didn't you?" "Yes, but I don't know if it was enough." "It's not about being enough," Franklin said. "It's about being different tomorrow." Bryce didn't say anything, but for the first time, he understood what that meant. 2 weeks later, the school gathered for a final assembly before spring break. The tone was lighter this time. Awards, recognitions, a slideshow of moments from the year. But just before dismissal, Principal Ellison stepped back up to the mic. "There's one more note," she said, smiling slightly. "Mr. Franklin Kensington has asked to say a few words." Whispers erupted. Bryce looked stunned. He hadn't known. His father walked onto the stage, dressed sharp but solemn. When he reached the podium, he didn't speak right away. Just scanned the room, the students, the teachers, and finally, Ms. Reyes. He began. "My son made a mistake. A serious one. And when he didn't just embarrass himself, he embarrassed me. Because I taught him to be strong, but not always to be kind." The room stilled. "I'm here today not to protect his image, but to protect the truth, that accountability is not punishment." It's the beginning of character. He turned slightly, addressing the students now. If you think your last name, your background, your bank account makes you untouchable, learn from my son. Learn from me. And more importantly, learn from Ms. Reyes. He looked over at her, humbled. You taught this school more than chemistry. You taught it consequence and grace. He stepped back, leaving the auditorium in thoughtful silence. That day, every student in that gym learned something that wouldn't be on any test. That disrespect breeds downfall. That arrogance has limits. And that sometimes the quietest people carry the loudest power. Thank you for watching. Subscribe me and hit the notification bell to not miss new stories. Bye.